there. Um, Hopefully we can try and keep this sort of informal. I've got a bit of a presentation to go through about some of the work that we want to do and some of the work that CILIP is already doing in the international arena. And then if we do have time, but you know, I've got some photographs from Finland and many other places that we've travelled sort of far and wide, and I'd like to sort of show you some of those very sort of quick sort of photographs. So I will sort of canter through this sort of a formal part of the sort of presentation. First of all, I'd like to say that the world is sort of getting smaller. The UK library and information world really impacts on everywhere else sort of in the world, and we need to share international vision with others. IFLA initiatives, including the global vision, future trends, the world map, is all shaping the international sort of agenda that we want to sort of work through. So I thought, in terms of this presentation, do it in sort of 4 parts, if you like. Changes at CILIP, just talk to you very briefly about some of the changes that are sort of happening in our organisation, because that's really going to set the international context for CILIP. Look at sort of currently what are we really doing in terms of international. You're probably very familiar in terms of ILIG, but there's also activities happening in other areas. And I really sort of want to do some sort of thoughts about a forthcoming presidential commission on CILIP's sort of new international strategy that I'm hoping that we'd be able to sort of develop over the sort of coming years. And really, this is really the start of the sort of dialogue. So I haven't really sort of used this presentation anywhere else, and you're the sort of first sort of group to experience it across there. So just to start off with, in terms of CILIP goal, really in terms of what we want to do, and I think this is the heart of the sort of work in terms of our international agenda, is CILIP's sole sort of goal is to put the information and library skills and professional values at the heart of a democratic, equal and prosperous society. And I think that's really sort of important, particularly with all the news that's sort of going on in terms of sort of data and trust in access to people's personal information. CILIP has sort of developed a new membership sort of model. It's more simplified, and I think for most members there's going to be roughly about 1/3 off sort of subscriptions. So we want it to be more affordable for sort of people, not just sort of in the UK, but also sort of across the sort of globe there. And the new membership sort of offer, I think, includes sort of things like the Information Professional, our new magazine. We now can be members of all CILIP's special interest groups, you know, at no extra charge. You know, I always just think which are the 4 groups I can choose and how many more can I join, but now you can really have access to most of them. And there's also an option for a leaders forum, which has specialist content at a sort of premium content. So it all has become much more simpler in terms of a model for us to go out and advocate for and explain to our sort of colleagues about that. Also, the new membership sort of model includes a new web link and social link, so hopefully that we can sort of interact and sort of work with others much easier. And I think there's a real opportunity around the international sort of agenda that we can use some of the tools that we've got to help develop those sort of skills there. And the second part of sort of the CILIP, we're going to be introducing a new staffing sort of structure in order to support the new organisation's goals. And CILIP has also developed a business plan in order to develop the sort of the vision and its programme moving forward, which has very sort of clear sort of targets. And we've got a board meeting tomorrow in terms of CILIP, where we're going to be looking in detail about those sort of actions. And really the whole business plan is based on growth of membership. We need something like 4,000 new members by 2022 in order to sort of break even in terms of the reduction in sort of there. And one of the key things I've been saying to my colleagues on the board and the chief executive is really international. We've got a whole world out there that we can sort of go on and get members. We don't just have to sort of think just in the sort of UK. So we've got a whole sort of big wide area to go for. Challenges sort of for the international sort of agenda really in terms of that. The first thing is limited funding, fewer engagement opportunities internationally. Many years ago, CILIP used to do a lot more in terms of the international agenda. There were grants for first timers, there was lots of grants for people to engage professionally, there was exchange programs, a lot. But obviously the fiscal sort of climate that we sort of living in, austerity, that has been. So people say, well, why are you talking about international and moving that forward? We've got sort of no money in order to do that. But there's areas that we can sort of look at about how we can do with perhaps, you know, sort of little opportunities. But I'm really particularly so pleased with ILIG because you're sort of developing the Anthony Hopkins Award by giving an opportunity for somebody to go to IFLA, and Ian's just mentioned that we had a selection panel meeting this morning to sort of do that. So despite CILIP as a sort of organisation not being able to support a number of people sort of going, at least some of the sort of groups and ILIG are doing their sort of bit in supporting somebody to get to Kuala Lumpur. We'll talk about that a bit later. And hopefully as our membership sort of reforms take effect and we get more people into something, things may change in terms of our support for sort of international sort of engagement, supporting people there. The other sort of challenge is really around sort of Brexit. We really must use this as an opportunity to sort of renew and refresh our international engagement and not just really drive to disengage and sort of isolation. And that's one of the sort of key reasons I wanted to use this year in terms of driving the sort of international sort of agenda forward, because many colleagues sort of internationally were saying to me, oh, hey, you know, sort of the UK, you're all sort of looking inwards, you're an island, you sort of moved away. And I said, no, that government, you know, might have been doing that, you know, there, but really us as a profession, us as individuals still want to reach out and move forward. But obviously that's going to affect some of the work that we do internationally. And also, it's still worth remembering CILIP, the sort of Library and Information Association, is the second largest library association in the world. And I think that's really sort of worth sort of mentioning. And we've got such a good reputation. I've been really all around the sort of globe. And it's only when you go away, people really appreciate how lucky and how fortunate we are to have such a strong association and the services sort of that we get and the sort of numbers that we sort of do. And our reputation is really very high. So often, sometimes people take a poke at CILIP, and we're not doing this, but really, you know, you go outside these shores and people say, you are so fortunate to have such a strong association. And the Presidential sort of Commission on CILIP's international policy, with the commission that I want to sort of move forward, aims to ensure a strong international dimension in present in order to take CILIP sort of forward across there. So those are some of the sort of agenda items there. Now, what do we do in terms of international work already? And I'm particularly pleased that Sue Brown's at the end, because Sue used to lead a lot of the international sort of work, and some of these key areas are areas that sort of we're really from Sue's sort of day. So a leader, IFLA, CILIP's international sort of body, and sort of the sort of international issues and member networks, which I'll go through very briefly. So, first of all, CILIP is a founding member of ABLEDA, and I think it was formed in 1992, and Ross Simon, who was the chief executive of the Library Association then, when I sort of joined CILIP, really sort of was quite a sort of a prominent sort of member that sort of set it up there. Guy, that's sort of here in the audience, is really involved in sort of ABLEDA and currently is on the executive board. And I think your term ends in May. And we've probably got to think about what our engagement around that's going to be in the future, particularly around Brexit and how we sort of work in terms of the international European sort of field. And also, as part of ABLEDA, there's another colleague, Barbara Stratton, who used to work in sort of CILIP as a sort of copyright advisor, I think, really sort of still involved in an area of CILIP, chairs the expert group on information sort of law, which really advises ABLEDA on copyright reform in the EU, and things like sort of digital sort of markets and a whole range of advocacy around sort of access to sort of information, sort of copyright sort of there, range around sort of copyright areas there. But obviously, in the sort of future, because of Brexit, a bleeder will be changing its constitution, making full membership dependent on being a member of the Council of Europe rather than the EU, which really sort of presents and may sort of exclude CILIP from becoming a full sort of member of that. So we've got to think about how that has. So there are sort of consequences really sort of within the work that we do sort of across that. So this is sort of quite a specialist sort of area, particularly around copyright and something, but it affects all of us across there. The next area is IFLA. We're particularly sort of strong in the faith work to protect, which is really a faith, which is really around protecting intellectual freedom and sort of freedom of expression. And Martin Wade, who's a member of our sort of council, and Louise Cook, took over from Bob McKee and Paul Surges and are leading a lot of work around sort of freedom of access to information. And a lot of work that they're doing is really around sort of code of ethics for library and information sort of workers, around things around privacy and internet sort of governance sort of issues sort of across there. So we are really sort of quite fortunate there. The other area is around here is about the World Library Map. And this is what IFLA is sort of doing, is sort of basically trying to advocate and get as much information about libraries globally as possible, and they've sort of produced a software sort of tool to try and get information and statistics out globally about libraries across the sort of globe, so they can advocate to governments about the power of sort of libraries and our penetration across there. And that's been really quite difficult for us to do, because obviously we've got so many different sectors, and a lot of the information around our sectors behind paywalls of different organisations, and some we really don't know in terms of work-based libraries where information is. So it is quite embarrassing when you see these sort of maps. There's lots of sort of countries there where they've all populated the data, and you look at the UK and there's very little sort of data and data there, and people say, well, why aren't you getting involved? So it is something that we really need to look at, and how we can sort of do that. The other area about IFLA is they've launched a sort of IFLA global sort of vision, looking at a global vision for libraries, and what we are sort of looking at is how we sort of fit into that. And we are looking at a breakfast workshop on the UK's response to this sort of global sort of vision, and at the Brighton conference we're hoping to have the IFLA General Secretary or somebody sort of senior from IFLA coming and talking at our conference. Hopefully it'll be a sort of global conference, if you like, where we can sort of talk about the sort of global scene before we start looking at some of the sort of UK agenda. So we are looking at that, and what we are hoping is also to have a sort of policy sort of breakfast there, where we can start sort of engaging and sort of talking to our members about sort of our response to this sort of global sort of visioning sort of workshop there. IFLA also has lots of special interest sort of groups like yourselves sort of that we've got there, and that's really been our main area of engagement is through there. There's about 20-30 different specialist groups. I've been involved in 2 of those sort of groups over the sort of lifetime that I've been involved in IFLA. One has been on multicultural population sort of group, and I've sort of won there for about sort of 4 years, and for the last 3 years I've been on the Library International Buildings sort of committee, and it's just been absolutely fascinating meeting sort of colleagues across the globe and developing international standards sort of across that. And often all this sort of something I've sort of had to take time off work, taken some leave, had to sort of fund myself in terms of getting involved sort of across some of those, but it's been such a experience for me, and I've gained so much across that. So that's really the main sort of area in terms of what it is, and I do believe that in the next sort of few months we'll be sort of looking at sort of renewing a lot of the committees and sort of UK participation in those committees, so there will be a call out. So just think about yourselves if you want to get involved in some of those international committees there. Really an international sort of CILIP, really. You know, international sort of members, we've got an estimated something like 700 members sort of internationally. And I've about probably last year I went to Zimbabwe for a visit with the British Council to advise on some of the libraries up there, and I was so thrilled. I met some colleagues and they said, we're your members. They said, we're your members, you know, we're CILIP members and we value our membership so much. And it was really quite a difficult sort of place, and they said, well, we have a bank account outside Zimbabwe just to pay our CILIP membership because of the currency sort of rates and something, and they said it was a sort of lifeline, and I was just really sort of taken sort of back about how they valued something. Like 700 members is a lot of members, probably some of the bigger members than some of our special interest groups in terms of, I don't know how many members we, you know, of some of those areas there, so it's quite a significant area. But also, in terms of facet publishing leading the way, something like 60 or 70% of our current sales of books are to overseas sort of markets, so it's really sort of a big business there. We have sort of information sort of professionals sort of across there working in many sort of areas there, and one of the areas is we sort of accredit 25% of our accreditation of library schools is in library schools abroad. That's really sort of good. Next week on Saturday I'm going to Qatar, and I was just talking to some colleagues here earlier on about the library schools sort of a provision sort of there, and it's really interesting that they're really keen to get CILIP accreditation in there, sort of across there, and I thought that's quite sort of significant there. And we have authors from over 30 different sort of countries there. We've got the PKSB, our sort of key sort of body of sort of professional knowledge that's being sort of used internationally. I've been involved in the British Council, and they're really keen to use that as part of the standard for librarians in the British Council sort of libraries sort of across there. And really standards and innovations that we've been sort of developing sort of across there. And we've got the resource description and access, which is really replacing the old cataloguing and indexing sort of rules. I think we're a partner internationally in terms of owning the sort of copyright and work across that. So we do sort of work, and all these bring significant income streams into CILIP, because some of my colleagues do say to me, even on the board, as I said, well, do we really want to focus on international? It's very expensive. What do we need to do with our members? And I've got to really present the business case. Well, actually, no, that is part of CILIP, you know, internationally sort of across there. And we therefore just have to keep reminding our colleagues that it's, you know, we are a sort of worldwide institution there. And then we've got international sort of issues. I suppose everything that we do really has an international dimension. Just a few of those. The UN Sustainable sort of goals, and key part of this is really what libraries do, and libraries sort of across the sort of globe are looking at sort of how library services sort of contribute to a number of those goals, and that's been something there around sort of peace and justice, around sort of stakeholder sort of engagement, and around developing stronger sort of governance of institutions and civic society there. We're involved in the World Summit for the Information Society, and particularly the information that we do around information literacy, it's really which was set out in the Alexandra Proclamation in 2005. It's work around our sort of literacy, new work, information literacy group that we do really is underpinned from a global international sort of standard there. And we recently engaged again with the Hague Convention for the protection of cultural property in the events of armed sort of conflict, and the UK finally ratified in 2017 that sort of convention. We were one of the very few countries that hadn't ratified that convention, to say that in events of sort of wars we would particularly protect sort of places of heritage and places of things that have got sort of a historical sort of value, and things like libraries and sort of books, but we weren't able to actually give the armed forces pinpoint exactly where some of these sort of collections are, but we are starting to sort of look at that, and we're sort of working with the UK Blue Shield Committee on some of that. I think recently we've been approached to be more involved in that, so that's some of the sort of key issues. more key issues, lots in the news about GDPR, lots in my organisation of us getting ready and sort of involved in that. Sort of 25th of May is there, and we're sort of looking at all our policies and procedures in the library service that I work at to make sure we're going to sort of comply with law. But that really comes in place across the whole of Europe, and we've really got to look at how we are sort of working with sort of colleagues around sort of governance and international sort of character, where we keep our information. A lot of our databases, library data, is stored in databases in sort of Europe, and we need to do a lot more work in terms of GDPR, and Naomi is working with sort of CILIP and sort of doing some training there. But again, reminding it's Europe wide, not just UK, and it sounds as if that might even become much wider than Europe. CILIP's ethical review is about to be sort of published. The values underpinning information work are shared across sort of nations. IFLA produces a code of sort of practice, and we've got to sort of realise that we sort of fit into a much wider area there. CILIP's privacy policy, the work that we've been sort of doing sort of across there, again sort of links with the work that we've been doing on the Faith Committee and privacy sort of policy, in terms of how are we sort of ensuring that we sort of comply with our sort of professional sort of values and sort of ethics. And obviously there has been some sort of controversy in terms of IFLA in Kuala Lumpur, really, in terms of the whole sort of issue about what countries do you go, what laws do they have, what type of regimes do they have, what are their sort of terms of sort of human rights. So there's all the sort of issues about what do you don't engage with anybody, or do you just go to areas. So there's been a whole sort of debate in terms of the whole sort of issues that in terms of ethical issues that sort of raised about where do you go, how do you engage, what do we do in terms of our sort of conferences sort of there. The sort of CILIP sort of family, and really this is really, we're looking at sort of doing a whole UK wide sort of approach, looking at international sort of perspective in terms of all our sort of devolved sort of nations. We are a UK wide sort of body, but really need to do a lot more across working, not just sort of UK sort of CILIP here in London, but across the areas, and for also working with sort of our sort of Irish sort of colleagues in terms of the work that we do sort of in Northern Ireland, sort of across there. ILIG, you all know about, is going to be one of the key sort of areas, and I'm really sort of pleased because you really have been the group that's been keeping the flame alight in terms of sort of moving forward of the international sort of agenda, something across that, when CILIP's been sort of developing its vision and its programs and sort of plans. I think in some ways international hasn't really been there, but you've at least been sort of doing a flag, and I can really understand they've been trying to get the sort of clear sort of basics sort of done sort of across there, and really in terms of half the library we've been doing work, and we've always had a steady stream of international sort of visitors across that. So those are some of the areas, and we've probably got to think, when we're looking at a new strategy and a new plan, about how are we going to get involved all the sort of parts of sort of CILIP. So there is some sort of working, particularly with the half the library group, do quite a lot in terms of there. So towards future sort of so in terms of towards the sort of future, is as CILIP is in the midst of change now, it's really time to ensure that international is part of the new CILIP. In looking at CILIP's international role, we need to be aware of and work with other sort of key players, the British Library, British Council, Library Development Agencies, schools, universities, and things. Actually, it doesn't necessarily need to be CILIP. If we can start working with some of these other agencies, we can have a really big sort of presence in the work that we sort of do. And CILIP not only needs an international policy, but we also need to excite and engage CILIP members and put international sort of on the agenda in terms of sort of moving sort of forward. And because of all this is why I really sort of chose that presidential commission to be sort of set now. And really, at the moment, we have sort of a broad outline of what we think the sort of presidential sort of commission sort of will be. We've just about sort of agreeing the terms of sort of reference with the chief executive, and CILIP board. We've got sort of boards sort of there. We need to sort of clarify sort of needs and expectations, because CILIP hasn't got huge amounts of money. We've got sort of quite sort of short in terms of capacity and sometimes, but what can we do? And one of the things I've been saying to sort of Nick Poole is we've got this fantastic new website and sort of tools in terms of engagement across that. Now, you know, when our platforms are there, we've got a new membership offer. Now that can really be sold sort of internationally sort of quite easily. Ian talked earlier about, you know, the print magazines no longer there, but now you've got things electronically. I'm sure we can do a lot more sort of internationally there. So we're going to announce the sort of commission and sort of launch it in May, and we're going to explore sort of ideas of an international sort of symposium in terms of CILIP. Maybe get the British Library, British Council, maybe Arts Council, all people involved in sort of areas will have an interest in bringing them together and say, actually, CILIP might not be able to do everything themselves. What can we do together? And there will be opportunities to sort of contribute to the Commission's work. We're looking at a period of sort of consultation and engagement, and I'm sure IGL is going to be sort of a key area of engagement in terms of as we move forward with that. What we're sort of hoping to do is, this is in terms of spelling out the sort of work. We're going to audit all existing activities. We really don't know exactly what CILIP does, because people, you know, special interest groups, different groups will be doing things and not necessarily sort of telling us all about it. So we're going to sort of do that. We're going to review all existing international sort of policies. We're going to sort of analyse sort of different actions or plans, and as I said, sort of move forward in terms of a sort of consultation plan. And I hope that there'll be a healthy debate about our international work during the year as we're going to sort of move along. And we're hoping that, as I said earlier on, that maybe perhaps the Secretary General sort of come to our CILIP conference in October to talk about the sort of global sort of vision sort of across there. And in terms of all that sort of seems, you know, sort of a little bit sort of way ahead, but a lot has also happened quite recently there. So I was thinking about the first sort of 10 days of my presidency. I wrote a letter to every single president of library associations across the globe, saying that CILIP UK is open. We're really keen, wanting to work with you across the library and information work. You know, we've probably not been going to many of the conferences, being visible in many of the international sort of arenas, but we really are sort of keen to do that. And we've been so pleased with the response that we've got. Nearly every day letters are sort of trickling in. I think just last week we got one from the president of the Jamaican Library Association. I'm meeting with the Canadian and American and I think German presidents in Kuala Lumpur in terms of meeting them. They're really sort of keen and sort of wanting to work with us. They want sort of links with the publishing sort of arm and sort of working there. So we are sort of looking at that. So that was really pleased about that in terms of that. Mentioned about the global sort of visioning workshop that we're hoping to do at the CILIP sort of conference. We've got the Kuala Lumpur there, and we're also very sort of pleased that colleagues here, some of you will be sort of available there. And did you get a burst? Phil got a burst. What was it? John Campbell?
I was looking up to get the John Campbell Trust bursary to go to.
Yeah, so that'd be your first sort of conference. So that'd be absolutely fantastic. Also, as I said, that elections are going to happening for all these special interest sort of groups or the special sort of committees that sort of cross that for 2019. So obviously, sort of Jacqueline and sort of Guy will start needing to put out the calls out for that. So, you know, if you are interested, please do think about it. You don't have to attend all the conferences. A lot of work you can do in between, something like that. Quite recently, the buildings committee that I'm at, you know, I couldn't really go across the world. So I said, why didn't you come to Birmingham? Why didn't you come to Warwickshire? So they all came here, which was so great. So, you know, all have to go there. And they were so pleased to sort of come here. And sort of finally, the other thing was that what was really interesting was, because, you know, there has been something really is international a priority for us now. And what I have been saying to my colleagues on CILIP board, on sort of council, is that international was one of the top 10 agenda items when we asked members through shaping your future consultation in sort of 2016. We said, what are the key things you wanted in advocacy? But in the top 10 was international. They wanted to have more opportunities and sort of get involved there. So I'm really sort of saying this is really part of our business case. This is really makes sense if we want to grow as an organisation. We want sort of new markets, new areas. Really, we've not really got to just think about the shores that we're in. And really sort of finally, it's really sort of opportunities around sort of a sort of hopefully that you'll sort of comment and sort of views and sort of ideas sort of across there. So that's sort of me done in sort of this part. So is there any immediate sort of thoughts? Is it the right direction, or is we missed something completely? What do you think? Yeah.
I mean, I think as a membership model, it is quite good, and I know that other organizations are sort of expanding internationally. But I do worry about attracting the interests of, you know, sort of more ethnically diverse population of information professionals in this country.
Yeah.
Now, I know that, you know, we'll reach out to the American Library Association. They've got a specific wing. But when we're reaching out to these other sort of agencies, what are we showing them about our demographics?
Yes.
If we've only got a certain type of profile.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that? What's your view on how we tackle that issue?
Right. Basically, that's a very, very important sort of issue. And we've identified it, and CILIP have sort of developed a equality and diversity sort of action sort of plan, and central to that is to make try to work towards making our profession far more inclusive across that, and there's a whole sort of area of sort of dimension of sort of work and actions that's sort of going on in there, because obviously the workforce planning exercise and the work that we've sort of been doing has really sort of shown us that we really got to reflect society much more across that, around a whole range of sort of things, not necessarily just culture, but also around sort of disabilities and other areas. And there's quite serious, I think we're looking at it quite seriously about how we sort of move that forward, but it's going to sort of take some sort of time, and we'll have to look at, you know, maybe international practice, what happens in other places, can we learn from that? Guy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think my colleague who I met before recently, one of the things which is under active discussion at the moment is creating something along the lines of, still to be defined, the American Library Association Black Caucus. And that's very definitely on the agenda. It's something that Nick's very interested in doing, and you have been, I think, invited to help make that a reality. So that's, I mean, I can assure you that not only is the board very enthusiastic about taking forward diversity, but so is Nick Paul. It's recognised as being something that is, well, it's wrong. It's as straightforward as that. It's wrong in that so much of many of our population is not represented within our body, and it's also actually it doesn't fit well with the idea of a CILIP of growth. And this is an area in which we really have to grow more.
So it's not necessarily just a sort of moral case, it's really also about the sort of whole thing around sort of the business sort of case, in terms of actually, you know, we want to and we've got to have, I think, 4,000 extra members by 2020, and we just need to open up the pool as wide as sort of possible. So a lot of work sort of happening sort of across sort of that there. Any other areas in terms of that? I have, go on, Alice.
CILIP is registered charity 313014, and it, as the Library Association, it became a registered charity with that number in 1964. And the governing documents of the charity is the wording of the Royal Charter at any particular point in time. And I'm just wondering if the constraints on CILIP under English law as a charity, and the constraints imposed by having a Royal Charter might impinge on expanding CILIP's activities in some directions.
Yeah, so at the moment I don't think we've really sort of identified that as an issue, but if we do, we'll need to sort of look at that. But at the moment now we're a global sort of profession, and in fact I think we're the first or the second member of a IFLA. So when IFLA was being set up,
We were a
as it
founder member,
founder, yeah,
founder member in Glasgow in 1924, was it?
yeah,
I think we're
2002.
001.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking there. So we're the first sort of member sort of across that, sort of across there. So you're absolutely sort of right. And one thing I wanted to show you, literally if you've got 4 minutes, it won't take more than 4 minutes. Can I just show you a few slides of some of the place? And one of the ones I think was, and it's just a few pictures, so I won't talk about it, and then we can all have a there. Let's just. So what I was going to show you was I'd sort of put this slideshow together. So that was the very first. I was the international officer for the Career Development Group, or AAL at that time, and I organised a trip to Lithuania for about 20 librarians sort of in the UK. And we just had, and that was my very first sort of international sort of. Did you come to that one or no?
No, I think not.
I think John Lake might have sort of done.
I think John.
And my very first conference ever internationally was, I went to Jerusalem into the year 2000, and that was really very, very interesting in terms of visiting there. This was me when I had hair. And this was in Bethlehem, so we went to the sort of Palestinian sort of territories, and this was a refugee camp, and it was so sad when I went there in terms of seeing this sort of refugee camp and the libraries that they had sort of there. It really sort of opened up sort of eyes there. Talked about Scotland. I also got involved in the planning for the IFLA conference in 2012, and I've still got proving it my bag across there. And at that time, it took you had like a 4-year cycle. You had 4 years to plan the conference. So CILIP had that sort of joy of organising and planning that conference, and we had a big sort of committee, and that really sort of got me interested in international. Managed to get to South Africa, sort of Canada. IFLA was sort of in Quebec there, so managed to sort of get there. And this was when IFLA was in Milan, so I think anybody went to Milan sort of conference there?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's up too. That was sort of amazing sort of across there. And this is a very, very sad conference when we went to Gothenburg. It's really sort of sad because at that time what happened was I was on the board and sort of guy was there, and do you all remember Bob McKee? Unfortunately, he died at that conference, and it was a very, very sad conference, and sort of it was really sort of quite there. So that was sort of really something like that. Don't really like to talk about that. But also part of being on the international committee, I went to sort of Seville as part of the multicultural sort of committee. And Vancouver, where we talked about sort of populations. It was indigenous populations, and how do we look at sort of multiculturalism. And that was absolutely fascinating. And because there were local people there, we funded ourselves to go, but it didn't cost that much because the local people, we made sure we went, somewhere really cheap, on a cheap place where we went on sort of airlines, and they gave us really good places to sort of go and sort of stay and sort of live in, and there's lots of hospitality from the library sort of there, so that was really sort of quite amazing. Finland was sort of another sort of conference sort of there, and that was sort of quite good. And then, did I say sort of travelled all around the world? So just a few months ago, I got the International Buildings Committee to come to the West Midlands. So that's the Library of Birmingham, that's the University of Birmingham, that's the Hive in Worcestershire. So I said, and they just couldn't believe in such a small, we had the most amazing sort of libraries they've never seen. This is like people from Canada and America and Australia, couldn't see anything like Birmingham, the university there. They said, how come we don't know about these things? And it's like in the Midlands, where you wouldn't really sort of see some of these areas there. And I was really pleased because I also took them to see that to one of my libraries in Warwickshire, and that's Stratford upon Avon. It's next door to where Shakespeare was born there, in that cottage there, and this is our library there. And I've got a copy of the first folio here, And that's Shakespeare's ghost, he wanted it back. So this was the international sort of committee. So, you know, you don't always have to get people sort of going sort of there. So they came. So they had absolutely wonderful sort of time across there. So we organised sort of all that there. And I've also done some work with the British Council because they've got libraries sort of across the world. And I've sort of been sort of helping them there. And this is in Moscow, so they sent me to Moscow to do talk about sort of areas there. I'm not sure whether I'll be allowed to go now. And then they sent me to Siberia. So, you know, something like that. People just wouldn't believe that I'd actually sort of end up in sort of Siberia and sort of cross there. So that was such an experience. Where would I be able to get such an experience to go sort of across there? I also done some work in sort of Pakistan with the British Council, wanted to develop sort of libraries, and this is a sort of director of the British Council librarian. He's a librarian, and she's a librarian from the Qadiadam library sort of there. But we were really talking to them about British Council libraries, but we see what was else there, and that was really, again, an amazing sort of experience there with my colleague sort of John Dolan there. Went to Sri Lanka, and then as I mentioned, Bellawaya, talking to Bookade International, they were just so something went there, and he's the president of the Library Association for Zimbabwe. Again, you know, you heard so many stories about Zimbabwe and what it was and stuff. It was the most amazing sort of country and the people there and you learnt so much in terms of the culture and area there. So I was so pleased there. I've been doing some work sort of recently in Bangladesh. They got an award from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to develop their public libraries, not the British Council libraries there. And they invited sort of me to come on a sort of policy they did, developing a new vision sort of for libraries. So we've been sort of talking about the sort of future of sort of libraries there. The government's given them some money to develop their public libraries, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are giving them. So they've been sort of doing that. So again, we've been doing some sort of work there. So I was really sort of pleased, and there were some amazing people that I've seen. And this is Kirsty, she's from Scotland, and she's a director there, managing all that sort of project there. And again, we brought them all groups here. We brought about 20 of them. We brought them to CILIP, showed them the professional body of knowledge. Many of them are doing their mentoring sort of and CILIP qualifications sort of here and being supported there. Done some work in India and sort of Germany in terms of West Bengal, in terms of their library sort of population. So I really have been there. A few weeks ago, I went to one of the most amazing libraries in the world, to Aarhus, to speak to sort of suppliers there in terms of international sort of work, in terms of sort of IT sort of cross there, and it was quite amazing. They've got this bell in the library, and whenever a baby is born, this bell rings, and it's linked to the hospital. So, and they say, well, a new citizen's born, and what best place to have it ringing than in their sort of library? And you sort of go there, you just put your car there, and the car automatically goes. It's like it automatically sort of drives itself and sort of parks itself. It's sort of all levers and shifts and stuff. It was like really quite an amazing library around sort of citizenship there. And on Saturday, I'm flying to Qatar to the new opening of their new national library sort of there as part of sort of our sort of presidency. So that's sort of looking forward, and I think, and then we've got Kuala Lumpur to go to, and then basically there's also an international symposium for librarians in sort of Turkey later on sort of in the year. Some of these are just like going for 1 day or 2 days, so you know it sounds a lot, and this is over 20 years, these slides or something like that sort of across there. But also what's been fascinating is really sort of closer to sort of home in Scotland, Wales, sort of Ireland in terms of doing that. So really have travelled the world sort of through the library sort of there, and you just wouldn't sort of think that we are actually sort of quite a small sort of world, but I've actually sort of learnt so much, and I come back and I'm so humbled and realise that, you know, we can talk about austerity and cuts and what we haven't got, but you really go around the world and you realise you get so many new ideas, but also you realise actually we are really quite fortunate, and you know it stops you sort of from really sort of thinking in terms of glass half empty sort of across that. So really that was just a sort of few photographs before the end, and it's 5:30, so it's actually on time there. So thank you all very much for being such a good audience.